a very rich interactive experience, and they engage students in collaborative activities. So the examples that I'm going to show you today, I chose them because of the simplicity of which they can be implemented. And they're also adaptable across all grade levels and different curricular areas. So we're going to look at one module at a time. Now, I'm not going to be presenting from the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to be using a demo course, and I'll be sharing my screen momentarily. If you would like to access the demo course to see the live examples, you certainly can do that. If you want guest access, you'll use the instructions at the top. If you want student access, you'll use the instructions at the bottom. And if you don't get this information down before I change slides, you'll notice that at the very bottom of the iMoot page for my course, you will see this exact same information. So that is how you can get access to the demo course. Okay, I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So I'm now in the demo course, so we're going to start with forums. Now, forums are typically used for discussion questions. The teacher posts a question or a prompt, and the students respond to the teacher and comment on the other students' responses. And of course, this is a very powerful and worthwhile use of the forum, but the ideas that I'm going to share today go just beyond that basic use of the forum. First, you're going to see that the forum can be used for role playing. Very simple. This could be used in history type classes, literature-based classes, and allow students to assume a role of a person or a character that's being studied and have them reenact a situation either in the book or in history. So if we look at 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, you're going to see that I pose the question, how was the decision made to warn the colonists that the redcoats were coming? And you can see this conversation is taking place between Ron and Donna, and Ron is assuming the role of Joseph Warren, and Donna is assuming the role of the colonel. And you can see the conversation that might have taken place with these characters in history. And students can read those very carefully. It might also be a good idea to allow the students to change their profile image. So Ron would change his image to appear to be Joseph Warren to help facilitate the conversation a little bit. So very simple, but also very powerful, requiring the students to think a little bit more deeply about what it is that they're studying. Now, you might have noticed that rating was enabled for this discussion, and I'll go back and point out that rating in just a second. If you would like students to rate each other's post to make Moodle more social and more like websites that they see every day, like Facebook or Amazon, where they can rate a product that they purchased, those sorts of things, you could do that same thing in Moodle. All you have to do is go to the permissions for that particular setting, and you will locate the rate forum post and add students to that permission. So if you notice, if I go back here, and if you are logged in as a student, you will also be able to rate the post. So I can rate to say how many stars that I would like that student to receive. Now, students will only see the aggregate of the ratings that they received. They won't see how everyone else was rated. And of course, those ratings can also be used to take a grade. Okay, you can also podcast with the forum module. Now, your site administrator will have to do a bit of work to make this happen. So you can see I have the steps listed here. They will have to, in the site administration settings, enable RSS feeds in the advanced features. And then in the forum settings, they will also have to enable RSS feeds, change that to yes. So if I open the podcast in the forum, you can see I started a discussion, and here is my file. Students have the ability to play that file. To subscribe to the podcast, they would simply go into the administration block for that particular activity and click on RSS feeds of discussion, and that would allow them to subscribe. They can add it to their feed readers, such as Feedly, so that they will get your podcast on a regular basis. Book clubs and literature circles is another way that you can use Moodle, especially in a blended situation when you are working with small groups of students. What's the rest of the class doing while you're busy working with that small group? Well, one thing that I encourage teachers to do is to create an area where students can discuss online whatever the book is that they're reading. And you can see that for this particular book, The Night of the Twisters, I broke it down into page numbers. So that would correlate with the assignments that I made for the students to read. So you can see here is my prompt. Notice that I have ratings enabled, so you can see I'm logged in as a teacher right now, so I can see everyone's ratings. But you can see that the conversation can take place quietly while you are busy teaching that small group of students. Okay, next we're going to go on to chat. Unfortunately, I think teachers tend to shy away from chat, sometimes because of concerns about cyberbullying, but most often they have little knowledge of how to use chat and how chat can support learning. So teachers who do incorporate chat into their instruction, they often utilize it as a study tool, setting up evening chat sessions that students can join the day before the test. And this use is, of course, very beneficial, but today we're going to look at how chat sessions can replicate some common uses of Twitter or other microblogging platforms while keeping students safely within the confines of your course, and of course providing that written record, that history of the conversation that happens. So collaborative TV watching, the way this works is if there is an important event that's going to be broadcast, maybe it is, in this case I've used presidential debates, maybe it's the State of the Union address, some other important event that coincides with something that you're teaching in the classroom. You would ask them to all tune in and watch together, and then they would have their conversation within chat about what they are viewing. So the way I would set this up, you can see the chat. Here's the information that the students would see. And if I go in to see the chat history, you can see that the students had an opportunity to comment on what was happening exactly as it was happening. Then this chat history could be a basis for further discussion in the classroom the next day. And that's very much an idea that I got from Twitter. If you are a Twitter user, you know that often there's tweeting happening based upon what's going on TV. So put this to good educational use and have students use the chat module for the same purpose. Create a back channel for lectures. So as the teacher is lecturing, it's good to assign one student to monitor the chat. All students can participate in that back channel. And you can see students can ask questions that they still need to have clarified for them. And if other students can't answer their questions, whoever is in charge of monitoring this chat for the day at the end of the lecture would be responsible for asking those questions so that the teacher could respond. Very similar to what you're doing right now. So as I'm teaching or lecturing, you all are chatting in the chat window. Hopefully some of you can answer each other's questions. If not, at the end, I will be answering questions as we go along. Okay, collaborative note-taking. Rather than have students take notes on a piece of paper or Google Docs on their own, you can use chat to be able to make it more collaborative. So the chat history could then, of course, even be printed out so that students could have a more complete set of notes than what they might be able to take on their own. The teacher could examine these notes to see if the students understood the key parts of the discussion, to see if there's anything that they need to reteach. Okay, number 8 is using the chat, the bubble chat theme. And I find that many users don't know that this even exists. But students tend to like it because it makes it look like they're texting on their smartphone. So if I open this chat and go ahead and enter the chat room, you'll see that here is themes, and I can select bubble. And now when I type, it appears in a chat bubble. So just a simple thing. Students tend to enjoy that. And to me, it's a little bit easier to read because it gives a little bit more separation in the chat. Creating a progressive poem or progressive story. So the idea here is that with the poem, the teacher starts and gives them one line, and students have to write the following lines one at a time. If in case of poetry, you could give them the rhyming pattern that they need to follow. So here's an example of how that works. So you can see I started it off with the line, read the sign. It says no smoking. Donna says, I'll tell you one thing, they're not joking, so on and so forth, so that you have created a collaborative poem at the end. Okay, next idea for chat is to use it for vocabulary instruction. And many times vocabulary instruction in classrooms is, here are your words, define them and use them in a sentence. Well, we know that the research indicates that students need to be actively working and using those vocabulary words in order for them to become integrated into their everyday language. So to set this up, here are the vocabulary words for the week, and their job is to use vocabulary words in sentences and respond to peers about the use of their terms. So they're going to be getting feedback on whether or not they are correct to be able to correctly use this. So if you look at the chat history for that, and you can see Donna says, the blue whale is an immense animal. Ron says she's correct because it's the largest animal. Then you can see Chris was lazy and industrious about doing homework. Donna says, I don't think Chris can be both lazy and industrious at the same time. Those words are opposites. So students are actively working with those words, and they are also getting feedback from their peers. Okay, next we're going to go on to the glossary. And the glossary I find is most often used also for vocabulary instruction. And when used with Moodle's auto-linking feature and the random glossary block, it provides some much needed support for vocabulary development in students. Again, this uses sound educational purposes, but the ideas that I'm going to share are going to utilize the glossary more as a student publishing tool. One thing that you will want to make a change to if you're going to use the glossary as a student publishing tool is you want to allow students to be able to embed things like videos or Web 2.0 projects that they have created. And by default and for security reasons, Moodle does not allow iframe code to be pasted in everywhere. So they prevent students from doing that. So you have to grant students permission to do that in that particular glossary. So here are the steps right there for you. I won't take time to read those, but basically your administrator is going to change some of the site policies for security and enable trusted content. And then you can see that you as the teacher will go into the glossary administration and permissions, and you're going to override and choose the field, or in the override field you'll choose students. So then you'll select allow, and then students will be able to embed things into the glossary. So having students to create a collection of resources that could be used by other students. You could have one glossary in your course for this particular purpose. And for example, if it's here we're asking for a science websites. What science websites have they found that are appropriate? And of course, you know that you can allow students to contribute to the glossary. You just make that option or check that option as you're setting it up. So there is an example of adding them that way. You can also do things like create a virtual zoo. So here I have allowed students to embed webcams. So here we have Pete's Pond in Africa. So you can see live what's happening at the pond. Doesn't look like too much is happening there now. So you can really allow students to create almost anything and put it into a collection. Another thing that can be done with glossaries, number 13, is book reviews. So instead of those traditional book reports that students don't particularly like to write, and they tend to only be read by the teacher, why not have them instead do a book review or a book talk and embed that information into a glossary? So here's an example book review. And you can see Night of the Twisters. Here is what how the student reviewed it. And you can actually link to, I used Amazon in this case. You could also link to Google Books, often has an excerpt that you are able to read part of the book. So case, we can see here's our book. And we can browse to read some of the information. Let me click here. Maybe that'll get us to content first. So they can read the introduction and decide if indeed they do want to actually read this particular book. And I do find when students are more likely to take advice from a peer about what books they should read rather than from the teacher. So if a student says, I don't know which book I should read next, if you have students do this, you'll have a place to send them to get ideas about new books. Okay, it can also be used to publish any type of essay, report, paper, whatever you'd like to call it, that students are responsible for writing. And we know that when students publish to an audience of their peers, that definitely raises their level of concern about what it is that they are creating. And as a result, those products tend to be of higher quality. So here you can see students were allowed to post them here. Here's a report about the heart. So if you enable commenting so that students can comment on each other's work, they're also getting that valuable peer feedback. Maybe they are allowed to get the peer feedback and revise their entries in the glossary before it counts for a grade. So all sorts of different ways that you could use glossaries for specifically that publishing tool. For language learning in the classroom, we know that students are more likely to learn language if you do more than just text with them. So in this case, I've given the Spanish term, the English term. They're able to actually hear it by a native speaker, and they also see the picture. So it's going to be more likely to stick into their memory if they see the term explained in all three forms. You'll notice that I also have that connected to a random glossary block so that each time the students log in to the course or the course refreshes, they're going to be exposed to a new term. Hopefully that will help them learn much quicker, help them to review the information. And along the same lines as publishing, as I showed you earlier, in this case I'm using poems by Shel Silverstein. So if you are studying poetry and you want to make a collection for your favorite author, you can see that this is here. What would be wonderful is to allow students to write their own poems and then have them featured in the course using the random glossary block so that it will rotate through the student's work so that each student has an opportunity to have their work viewed by the other students. Okay, we're going to go on to quizzes. And what you will see many times with quizzes, they're just pretty basic. You're going to see lots of multiple choice type questions, especially for beginning teachers, maybe some true false, and they don't really explore some of the other options. And they will go with the default deferred feedback option. So I'm going to be showing you some different things that you can do with quizzes, some easier ways to create quizzes rather than doing it by scratch. So number 17 is to use the Quizlet website. If you're not familiar with Quizlet, it is a website that allows you to create interactive flashcards. So we're going to go to Quizlet first. And you can see I'm already logged in. And I'm going to choose one of the sets that I have access to. And you can have all the options for, I can play in flashcard mode or speller mode. I can do some of the games. I do have those options, and those are also embeddable, so they can be placed in Moodle quite easily. But what you want to do at this point to turn these quiz questions from Quizlet into a Moodle quiz is you want to click Export. Export. You're going to see this information here, this data. So you are going to copy that to your clipboard. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to go to this website. I have it linked for you here. And you are going to paste that information into the text area at the top. And then you're going to choose your question style. Notice that you can choose from short answer, matching, or multiple choice. I will choose multiple choice. And then this is placing that information that you pulled from Quizlet, and it is representing it in the GIF format. And that is a format that can be uploaded to. So you would simply download the file, and then the next step, once you've downloaded the file, is you would actually import it into your question bank area. So if you've never done this before, here you'll see is the question bank, and notice that you do have an import option. There you'll simply upload the file and it will pull all of those questions in. Then you're able to add those to quizzes very simply. So this link is to a video that will walk you through step by step with that process. And here is just an example quiz that has been created using Quizlet. Notice that it's multiple choice. So students can take the test just like they would any other test that you have for them in Moodle. Okay, number 18 is using the quiz as an interactive study guide. One thing that I encourage teachers to do is to make many questions testing the same objective so that they actually have a large bank of questions for each quiz that they pull from. Then they can use that group of questions as an interactive study guide. Now to do that, you have to have the feedback option set to interactive with multiple tries for the question behavior. And then the number of hints that you add to each of the questions is going to determine how many tries the students receive. So here's an example of how this works. If you've never seen an interactive test. Okay, so you can see I was here before and I checked the option, he saved his bus money, and it tells me that's not correct. And it gives me a hint, his parents were poor. So then I can try again. Maybe this time I'm going to say he sold his books. I can check. And it says no. Then it gives me another hint. I can try again. And we'll try this one. And that is the correct answer. So students are able to immediately get that feedback that is so important to the learning process as they're studying. Now, this really isn't that much more work for teachers to create an interactive version of the quiz. When they're finished to create the final test, they can simply duplicate it and they'll change the question behavior so that it's no longer interactive, so that the students don't receive the hints and that they're only allowed one attempt. So this would be the same test. You make those very simple changes to it and you're ready to go for your final test. You can also use Moodle Quizzes for building speed of knowledge type quizzes. So by that I mean anything that you would like students to have automaticity of. Total recall without even having to think about it. So things like math facts, if you're in elementary school, or maybe the symbols for the periodic elements, if you're teaching chemistry, those sorts of things. So you would start by creating a practice test with unlimited attempts. So when we go into this quiz, you can see it's starting to time me. Again, you could have that big bank of questions so that each time that they're allowed to take it, it's going to randomly pull from those questions. And again, to create the final test, you simply duplicate it and change the settings so that they only have that one last attempt. Another thing that works wonderfully with the quiz module is monitoring flipped classrooms. If you're new to the idea of flipping, it's simply reverse instruction. So instead of getting the lecture in the classroom, the lecture is delivered by video at home, and then class time is used to solve problems or create projects so that students are able to interact with the teacher much more than they would be able to interact if the teacher was busy delivering a lecture. Well, the first question that I'm always asked when I talk about flipping the classroom is, how do we know that the students are watching the videos? Well, Moodle makes that a very simple process. So what I'm going to do, you see their instructions are to watch the video about parallelograms and answer the question. So I embedded this video into a description type question. It's really not a question at all. It's simply a text area that you can embed or put in extra instructions, anything like that. So I've used that to embed the video. And then you see that there are questions that I want the students to answer. So if I have completion tracking enabled, I can quickly see. I can also use the quiz results to see which students watched the video, which students answered the questions, how did the students perform on the questions. Is there a particular area that they don't understand about parallelograms that I need to reteach before class begins? So this is going to give you lots of information to help you decide how your instruction should flow for that particular day. Very simple to do. Okay, we're going to go on to choice. And the choice module, if you're new to choice, is simply like a poll. So teachers ask one question and students are able to respond. Very simple things that you can do with that. I'm going to show you some sort of clever uses of it. Many times if you're asking students to work in groups or to select a particular topic that they will be completing a project for in a group, sometimes it's difficult to make that happen. If not necessarily difficult, but it's going to be time consuming to make sure that each student has the topic that they prefer, each student is in the group that they prefer, so on and so forth. So with this particular example, I enabled the limit the number of responses setting. So for example, I would say only 4 people in a group, so only 4 people could select that group. And then I chose not to publish the results to the students. You would be able to deliver that information to the students later. So when I look at this, here is the question that the students would see. So in this case, they're going to create a project about a famous mathematician. And this time I didn't ask them to select their group. I asked them to choose their topic that they wanted to explore more about. And then as the teacher, I can easily view the topics and I can see my groups. My groups are going to be laid out for me. I do recommend that you leave the option of not answered yet so that you know specifically which students you need to remind to answer this question so that they can be placed in a group. You can also use choice to track student compliance. So instead of creating a class roster with all the students' names on it and checking off if they perhaps have indicated that they had their AUP signed or whatever it is that you are tracking compliance. So things like project requirements, do they understand them? Do they understand your grading policy? Do they understand your classroom behavior policies? Those sorts of things. So when you use it for compliance, you only give the students one choice. That choice must be yes. I also recommend that you again show that unanswered column, making it much simpler for you. So here you can see course expectations, and please indicate below that you've read and understood the above. They only have one choice. So they have read the above information about course expectations, and they'll save their choice. And then again, as the instructor, I'm able to quickly view the students who are in compliance and those who are not in compliance. Another option is to use choice to monitor their project status. So if you have students who are doing a project and first you want them to select a topic and then you want them to research, then you want them to create an outline and then a rough draft, you would list all of the steps for your particular project. And when you set this up, two things that you want to keep in mind. You want to select yes to allow them to update their choice. Very important for this particular use. And again, you also want to show that unanswered column so that you are aware of who hasn't really started their project yet. So when we look at this, you'll see all of the steps are listed here, and the students are able to select. As the teacher, I am able to view the point at which the student is, and then of course at the end of every class period, I would ask the students to update where they're at in the project. And because I've allowed the response to be updated, students will be able to do that quite easily. Okay, so the last tool that we're going to talk about is the feedback tool. And one thing that I love about the feedback tool is the visual display that it gives you in the analysis of the information or the data that you've collected. So one great activity at the beginning of the year, as new classes are being formed, you want to do icebreaker type activities to allow students to start to see things that they have in common with their classmates to build those relationships with their peers. So you will create a feedback type survey. Some things that you'll want to do, you want to select user's name will be logged and shown with the answers for the record username setting. You also want to select yes to show the analysis to the students after submitting. And you want to select no for multiple submissions. So if we take a look at this, we can see the questions. Okay, very simple questions. And then for the analysis, we get this lovely display. So we can see quite easily where everyone went for their summer vacation. And with the visual display, I can see, well, it looks like having a horse for a pet is a common thing in the class. And for softball, most of the students in the class are interested in playing softball and those sorts of things. As the teacher, I can also see specifically how each student answered. So it's going to help me to know more about my students as well. Another thing that you can do with the feedback tool is to create a parent survey. And if you've ever tried to create parent accounts in Moodle, it's a very timely process. You have to coordinate the parent's name with the student's name so that the parents are seeing the correct information. And it takes some time to make that happen. If you want to gather information from your parents and you want it to be anonymous, which most parent surveys tend to be anonymous, you're able to do that with feedback and posting it on the front page of your Moodle site. Now, notice that the site administrator is going to need to make some setting changes, and I've listed them for you here. Basically, in the feedback settings, they will allow full anonymous. Let's set that to yes. And I do want to point out that this is only going to work on the front page of the course with guest access. It does not work in courses with guest access. So if I go to the homepage of our site, you'll be able to see here is my feedback. And if you're logged in right now with guest access, you'll be able to see that you'll be able to access that and answer the questions quite easily. Okay, I have covered all of the items that I planned on covering, so I'm ready to take some questions. So do we have any questions, Anthony?
The one question, Diana, that I did hear was from Andy about RSS feeds and some privacy. How do you set that up if the site is somewhat restricted, that does not allow guest access and things like that? Have you had any experience in kind of tweaking some of that?
No, I haven't. I used it specifically for the students in that particular course, is the way that I was using the RSS feed. I'm sure that it could be accomplished by changing some of the settings and the permissions if you wanted to make it a public RSS feed. Any other questions?
I'm not sure if Andy wanted to jump in and maybe explain or get a little bit more specific about that, but we can always explore that. So maybe folks might share a little bit about what their kind of favorite idea that you presented or shared with them was, or how they've used it, and that might help create some questions as well.
Yes, great idea.
One question I'll just go ahead and ask had to do with using the glossary to create a list of resources for students. I've traditionally used a database for that. Have you played with that at all?
I have played with database, and what I find is it's a little bit more complicated, especially for beginners. And
Right.
the glossary makes such a simple database. The glossary is truly a database, a collection of all of those items. And it's just so simple to set up that teachers are more likely to use it in that way rather than using a database for it.
I found something similar with, you were talking about collaborative note taking and using the chat for that. And the ideal tool, I think, would probably be to use the Wiki. But it ends up being so complicated, I think, both for the student and the teacher, that it ends up being less effective, I think, than it could be.
I get the same feedback. Teachers don't like the Moodle Wiki, and chat is just so simple. Mm-hmm. And by giving students access to that chat history, you're able to really use it in lots of creative ways.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Just kind of reading in the chat here. Ellen talks about, kind of the difficulty with different modules, the different kind of resources that are available in Moodle. Do you have any recommendations how you've kind of learned to explore and poke around? And
when I started way back when with Moodle, I was the only one in my school that was interested in using Moodle in a blended model. And I knew no one at that time in the United States who was using it, although there were quite a few people. I just hadn't connected with them yet. And my advice is just to get in there and create it. You can't break it. What we do now to support our clients is I have created self-paced courses so that they're able to work through the course content. It's very video-based. They watch the video, they see examples, they take a quiz to test their understanding. Some of our schools are requiring that they complete the self-paced courses and earn the certificate or the badge at the end of the course as just a part of their required professional development. We also have found twice a month we deliver webinars to our clients on more complex topics. This was originally created as a webinar for our clients, this course that I'm showing you now. And not just doing it as a webinar, but also giving them access to live examples like you have right now in the demo course. You can go into that demo course and actually see how it's going to work. I find that providing those resources really does go a long way. I think that many teachers that are beginning with Moodle sort of get lost when they go to Moodle.org. They don't really know the terminology and how to best search to find the answers to their questions. And we know teachers are busy. They don't want to take time to have to read and sort and sift through information. So that if you can make the delivery much easier, delivery of the professional development much easier, it does definitely help them master those things much quicker.
yes. I know when I was working with teachers, I would frequently tell them, just do one thing at a time. And so, really play around with forums or play around with chat or glossaries and just kind of learn it gradually because it can be kind of overwhelming to try to pick up too much too quickly. And then you just feel completely lost.
Another thing that we recommend is that teachers sort of implement Moodle in stages. And first, because this is what they want to do, is they want to get all of the documents that they're already using into Moodle. So we instruct them what's the most effective way to make that happen. We caution them not to create that document dump that creates that horrible scroll of death, totally unengaging course. And then the second stage, we ask them to start using things like assignments and the quiz module so that they are seeing it more as it's also an efficiency tool for them. And then the third thing that we ask them to do is to add in the social aspects. So forums and chat and blogs and those sorts of things. And integrate the other instructional tools along the way as they need them. And that method has also been very helpful so that they're only focusing on just one part of what makes a good Moodle course first.
Yeah. I had a question about enabling students to rate forum posts.
Yes.
And rating is always kind of a tricky thing. One, how do you encourage students to actually do the rating, and then to do it kind of in a friendly, appropriate way, and or a constructive way. Do you have any tips for how to kind of encourage the students to engage in constructive ways when they're rating other students' posts?
Well, I view the ratings as sort of just part of the peer feedback that I like to build into my courses. so that students are really getting that good quality feedback from their peers and not just from me. So one thing that I talk about before the first time that I introduce this to students is, I model for them what is constructive feedback and
Mm-hmm.
how you are going to be giving feedback about their product and you're not making a comment about the person, those sorts of things. And I also ask them to make sure that they are clear on what the evaluation criteria are so that their comments, or in this case their rating, would be based upon the evaluation criteria and not just something that they think or feel. It's actually how the student is going to be evaluated. A simple thing to do, especially when you're giving feedback along with the rating, is the 2 stars and a wish model. Tell me 2 things that you like about my post or my project and 1 thing that I can do to improve. And I find that those are just some good strategies that typically really do work with guiding students in delivering constructive feedback.
Excellent. Any other questions from folks? Feel free to raise your hand or write something in the chat. I'm really grateful, Diana, for your creativity, for sharing your 30 plus years of experience with us. I found it very insightful and helpful. And just even little things like the bubble chat themes, what a big difference it makes to the students to increase engagement when you kind of cater to them and give them some of those little things that can make a big difference.
I will enter my email address into the chat window if anybody comes up with questions that they would like me to answer after today. So there it is. It's admin@schooltext.com. School, by the way, is spelled SQOOL, and it stands for Supporting Quality Online Opportunities for Learning.
Ellen was commenting about the forum post ratings, and I was involved with sort of expanding the ways that you can aggregate those ratings. Do you have a favorite rating type or a creative way of using that's helpful?
I like to create actual stars, a scale that is made up of actual stars, so that students are able to then select the number of stars. They just tend to like it a little bit more than assigning a number or something such as that to the forum.
Yeah, great idea.
And of course, the latest version now has where you can set up so that it has a like. You can simply like the post, which is more Facebook-like.
Yep. Very good. Well, again, thank you, Diana. If folks do have questions or experiences that they want to share, any just words of gratitude to Diana, please feel free to do that. I'll stick around here for a couple more minutes, and then I'll be shutting down the recording. But I think, Diana, you've done a great job of really kind of showing creative ways of using the activity modules within Moodle to do different things that you might not normally think of. And for me, the best one was using the feedback at the beginning of a course to really help establish the rapport with the students, rather than waiting to the end and just say, okay, how did I do? How badly did I do as a teacher? Let's kind of start things off on the right foot. So I really appreciated that.
Wonderful. So with that, I will wish everyone happy Moodling, and I might see you around in another iMoot course room. Take care,
We hope
everyone.
so. Thanks, Diana.